Friends, listen for a word from God in the book of Micah, the 4th chapter, verses 1 through 5. In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's temple shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. Peoples shall stream to it, and many nations come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and shall arbitrate between strong nations far away. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall all sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. For all the peoples walk, each in the name of its God, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever." This is the word of God for the people of God. Friends, I have a distinct memory of a series of books with orange covers and black and white images, telling the stories of great and famous Americans, called The Childhoods of Famous Americans. The books, which frankly had a bit of a Christian bent and extolled virtues like hard work, resilience, and faith, were meant to present these Americans as children with relatable experiences and struggles. In most cases, these stories were highly sanitized and included stories that were at best apocryphal, if not completely fictitious. If not the same series, it was published, by the way, in 1939 and remains in print today with different images. I imagine you also grew up with these types of similar hagiographies of United States founding fathers, and by the way, read white, male, and straight founding fathers, and perhaps a few founding mothers and one or two righteous people of color who, through hard work or the ability to pass as white, managed to be the first BIPOC person in their field. While no one is on record having recorded or having asked George Washington what his favorite Bible verse was, and he thankfully didn't claim that it was too personal, the verse Washington reached for again and again in letters to friends, to fellow officers, even to a Jewish congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, was Micah 4:4. "They shall all sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid." Historians count nearly 50 times he wrote it out, across 4 decades, from the Revolution through his presidency and into retirement at Mount Vernon. Washington loved the image of a man laying down his sword and going home to his own patch of ground, safe, unbothered, free from the noise of empire. It's a beautiful picture. If you've visited Mount Vernon, you can imagine an older, tired Washington walking the grounds of his estate, sitting under shady trees and being attended to by the over 300 people working the land in the main house. And there it is. The partial vision of Washington's own vision. While he quoted an image of universal, unafraid rest under vines and fig trees, the very people who built his estate, served in his home, and tilled its fields were slaves. People not only deprived of the freedom for which Washington fought, but human beings who could never sit under a vine of their own. Human beings literally bound to the land and to Washington, their master. The United States founding generation loved Micah's verse, but only for themselves. They took the fruit of the vision and left the roots in the ground. They cut down the proverbial cherry tree and definitely lied about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yesterday, we marked 250 years since those words and the document containing them were first signed. Having celebrated with picnics, fireworks, and voices raised in patriotic songs, tonight we need to ask a harder question. Not whether America's founders quoted good scripture, whether Micah's version has ever actually described the United States, and whether it does now. Now, for Micah's part, he wasn't writing court poetry. He was an 8th century BCE farmer prophet from the small town of Morsheth, watching the Syrian Empire swallow nation after nation, and watching his own leaders in Jerusalem get rich while they did it. The chapter right before tonight's text is one of the harshest passages in the whole of prophetic literature. Micah tells the rulers of Israel that they, quote, hate the good and love the evil. That they, quote, tear the skin off my people and, quote, eat the flesh of my people. He goes after the judges who take bribes, the priests who teach for a price, the prophets who preach peace to anyone who pays them to preach peace, and declares war on anyone who doesn't pay them. Chapter 3 ends with Jerusalem itself, the holy city, the capital city, reduced to a plowed field and a heap of ruins because of what its leaders did to the poor. And then this chapter, chapter 4, opens with this line. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains. Peoples will stream to it. Many nations will come. God will judge between them and arbitrate their disputes, and the result won't be one empire swallowing the rest. The result will be swords beaten into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. Nations will no longer even study war, and everybody, not just the powerful, will sit under their own vine and their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid. The same vision of this future appears almost word for word in Isaiah 2. Scholars place Micah and Isaiah at the same historic period, but we don't know who borrowed from whom, or if perhaps both writers were borrowing from some older vision, some older source text. We also need to remember that for both Micah and for Isaiah, what we know of as their books may very well have been written by their disciples, may have been written by other people and combined into the book of Isaiah and the book of Micah. What's important, though, is that this was a shared hope of an occupied and exhausted people. And notice where this vision sits in the book. It comes right after the worst of the indictment, not instead of it. Micah doesn't soften chapter 3 to make room for chapter 4. He lets the ruins stand, the plowed field, the heap of rubble, and only then does he say, in days to come. The hope doesn't erase the accusation. It depends on it. You don't get to the vine and the fig tree by skipping the part where the prophet names exactly who tore the flesh off the poor to make themselves comfortable. Also notice that what the vision does and doesn't promise. It doesn't promise one nation that will be on top forever. It promises an end to the arms race itself. Weapons melted down into tools that grow food instead of objects that end life. It doesn't promise a gated peace for the strong. It promises that no one will be afraid. A peace with no exceptions. And it locates security not in the size of one's arsenal, but in the size of one's own vine, their own fig tree, things that are ordinary and unspectacular. Now, I imagine for most of us, particularly in this day and age, there is a certain discomfort, though, in measuring security based on the amount of land that we own. Washington, a member of America's ruling landed gentry, could find peace in land ownership. But the over 300 slaves that he owned at the height of his wealth would find such a vision hollow. I believe that Micah's vision has less to do with actual ownership and more to do with having a place where one can find peace. Peace and leisure to sit under one's own vine and tree requires cultivating situations where we can find that peace rather than stake a claim to its ownership. Your vine or your tree may be a tree in a public park or your favorite table at your local coffee shop. Finding one's own peace was something Micah's audience knew well. They were living with the active fear of being overrun, exiled, even killed. That was the vision America's founders, all of them, reached for when their war finally ended, a place to find peace. But the 250th birthday of the United States forces us to consider what we've built in the last 2.5 centuries, and how close or far we've come to that vision. So let's talk about the United States at 250. We are the largest arms dealer on the planet. The United States sells more weapons to more nations than every other country combined. And we have built an economy in more than one town, in fact, in more than one state, where plowshares have been beaten back into weapons of war, because, frankly, that's where the money comes from. Our culture of weapons, known as the defense industrial complex, extends its reach into every part of public life, poisoning a country that has always had an uneasy relationship with the gun. We've also built the largest prison and detention system on the planet. And here, too, we've named it the prison industrial complex. Because in the United States, we figured out that not only can your company build prisons for the government, you can manage those prisons for the government, too. But if these private prisons want to turn a profit, which obviously they do, they need a steady stream of inmates. Enter the school-to-prison pipeline, the methods by which a disproportionately large number of Black and brown people, particularly men and boys, are over-criminalized, over-policed, and over-adjudicated to years and decades behind bars. Making up approximately 14% of the U.S. population, Black people account for a staggering 42% of the incarcerated population. And I hope we all understand that that cause is not because of some violent tendency among Black people, but rather because of white supremacy and the legacy of racism and slavery in this country. Overall, conservative estimates place the incarcerated population in the United States at approximately 2 million people, including local jails, state and federal prisons, immigration detention, youth detention, and other incarcerated situations. And if that number seems low, and it definitely seemed low when I saw it, consider this. Almost 5 million Americans are formerly incarcerated. 19 million Americans have been convicted of a felony at some point in their life, and more than 79 million Americans have a criminal record. And here's the stunner. 113 million Americans, that's a conservative estimate, 113 million adults in this country have had at least one immediate family member serve time in jail or in prison. That's approximately a third of our country. And while immigration detention remains a small percentage of the total U.S. mass incarceration system, we have witnessed countless examples of people assumed to be immigrants because of their appearance, pulled out of their vehicles, off the street and out of their schools or places of employment, to be detained simply because they might look like an undocumented immigrant. And of course, we could talk about a healthcare system that leaves people afraid of an ambulance rather than a heart attack. We could talk about a housing market that has turned home ownership into a fantasy for entire generations. We could talk about how many of our school children have been trained through drills that most of us never went through to be afraid of the very buildings in which they're supposed to learn. Because we've decided again and again that easy access to firearms and the weapons of war is more important than children's safety. We could talk about how quickly the word freedom gets deployed to protect the powerful and how rarely it gets extended to the people underneath them. We could talk about how a nation 250 years into its own story still hasn't figured out how to let every one of its citizens vote without some sort of fight. Or how quickly a book gets pulled off a school library shelf the moment it tells the truth about our country. How an honest recounting of American history is often labeled as woke or inappropriate, particularly for white children. But at 6 years old, Ruby Bridges could face down a crowd of protesters to desegregate a school in New Orleans. Many of us know this fear from the inside, or we know it tangentially because of our friends, our colleagues, the people we love. And we know it not as a headline, not as a statistic, but rather as Tuesday or Wednesday. We know what it's like to watch legislatures debate our right to exist, to wonder whether this year's session ends with our families more or less protected. Micah didn't write, "No one shall make them afraid," as a suggestion for some people. He wrote it as the complete and utter point. None of that story is about individual meanness. It's a story about what a nation builds when it decides over and over across 250 years that some people's lives and their national inheritance matter more than others. Micah would call what it is, not a series of unfortunate policy decisions, but idolatry. Which brings us back to the verse almost nobody quotes, the one right after the one that Washington loved. Verse 5, "For all the people walk, each in the name of its own God, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever." And we need to pause here because this verse has been used over and over and over again to try to say that by walking with the Lord our God forever and ever, that Christianity, that Judeo-Christianity, that Abrahamic faiths are somehow those favored and only favored by God. But that's not what Micah's doing here. Micah doesn't picture a world where every nation gets absorbed into one unified empire, worshiping one and only one way to God. He pictures nations still walking their own paths, side by side, unafraid of each other, while Judah keeps walking in the name of its own God. Security doesn't require sameness. Peace was never supposed to mean uniformity. And here's the real question that this 250th birthday puts in front of us. Every nation walks in the name of some God, whether it admits to or not. And many of those gods are more natural or human than they are divine. In whose name or in what's name does the United States actually walk? Based on 250 years of evidence, we have often walked in the name of the God of market growth, a God of empire, a God of whiteness, a God of the national arsenal, and more frequently lately, a God of the border wall. That God has an American flag on its lapel and Micah's own verse in its mouth, but none of Micah's own vision in its policy or example. We do not have to walk in the name of that God. That was never the only American God available. There has always been another trend, another thread, a quieter and harder to kill idea running through abolitionists and suffragists and labor organizers, through the Black church, the queer liberation movement, and every immigrant congregation that has ever built a sanctuary out of nothing. It's a thread that keeps walking in the name of a God who actually means it when God says that no one will be made afraid. 250 years in, the truth is this: America has never fully been the vine tree and fig tree nation its own founder quoted into being. And pretending otherwise on a birthday doesn't make it any truer. In fact, America was never the vision of George Washington, because Washington's own America ensured peace and security only for men like himself, while literally building itself through the labor of people with no freedom and significant fear. But Micah was writing neither an apology nor a eulogy. He was writing a summons, addressed to the people who could still choose which God to walk after and what kind of days to come they were building towards. We don't get to fix the nation on Independence Day, or today on Sunday, or by next Sunday. That was never our assignment. The assignment is smaller and yet harder: to keep telling the truth about the distance between the vision and the reality, to keep refusing the God of the arsenal, even when it's dressed in the correct and patriotic flag, and to keep walking, however imperfectly, in the name of one whose peace was never for sale and was never reserved for a certain and select few. Where that leads each of us this week is between you and the God who is still, even now, in the business of beating swords into something that can grow food. Amen.